Well, with days stretching out longer and longer in June, Classic 107's album of the month stretches across days, years, and centuries to connect the present to the medieval. Electric Fields is the latest offering from soprano and conductor Barbara Hannigan, a recent recipient of the prestigious Polar Music Prize alongside iconic musicians Herbie Hancock and Queen. Hannigan joins forces with piano duo Katia and Marielle Labèque and electronic artist, arranger, and composer David Chalmin to shine new light on the works of Hildegard von Bingen, Francesca Caccini, and Barbara Strozzi. Barbara Hannigan joins us this morning from Finistère, France, to tell us more about the project. Nice to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and good morning.
And exactly. Good morning. Not so much morning where you are, but we're delighted to have you regardless. Stretching, as we said, across time, across years, across centuries. Maybe you can take us back a few years to when this project first started, I believe, back in 2022. Maybe you can take us back into the impetus for where this project came from.
Yeah, well, in fact, it goes back even further. I was in Paris in 2015 for an opera project, and I knew Katia and Marielle Labèque. We had mutual friends. We'd done a concert together before with the Berlin Philharmonic, and they introduced me to David Chalmin. And as I said, I was doing this opera project in Paris, and David said, "Do you want to come over to my studio and do some improvising with this other friend of mine?" I said, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll come over." So literally the next morning I went to his studio and we started improvising together, and there was a bass player and there was me singing, and David was doing all this kind of electronic stuff. And I thought, he's brilliant. And it was soon after that we started talking with Katia and Marielle as well about making a special project together, and we really didn't know what it was going to be. So it's actually been 10 years in the making, from the beginning until the recording, recently came out. And we decided that we wanted to use something very old and kind of mystical as the basis material, and that's where the name Hildegard of Bingen came up. And Hildegard of Bingen was like, I guess 11th century, mystic. She was an abbess of a convent. She was a painter. She was a composer. She was a writer. She was a philosopher. She was even a physician, as what a physician might have been at that time, making plant-based medicines, which are still used today. I mean, this woman was a powerhouse. And so her plain chants are pieces that I've actually been singing since I was, I think, 19 years old. I knew about her music. So she's kind of been part of my life for a long time. So that was our starting point. We thought, who could be more inspiring than Hildegard? And we took some of her plain chants and we started playing around with them and improvising over them and having some piano parts created for them. And then the project grew and grew, and we ended up thinking, okay, what other composers might we choose? Okay, Barbara Strozzi is super interesting. Francesca Caccini, moving into the Baroque from the medieval time. And then we thought, well, David should write something for us because he's also a composer. And then a really good friend of the Labèques is this composer named Bryce Dessner, who's also, he kind of has one foot in classical music and his other foot in I don't know what you call it, indie rock. I don't know. He has a band called The National. And so Bryce started writing some stuff for us. And so anyway, it ended up being a really collaborative project with composed material, improvised material, even using this funny language that Hildegard of Bingen created herself. It was like an exclusive language that she created called lingua ignota, means unknown language, that she and her nuns would speak, so kind of to keep everybody else out of the loop. They had their own secret language. So it's a mystical album. It's got a lot of spiritual kind of qualities. It veers into the ambient. It's not like anything else I've ever done, but I'm pretty excited about how it's turned out.
There's so much to break down within all of that. You talk about, maybe we can even start with some more of this conversation around Hildegard von Bingen, which is that, as you were mentioning, such an incredible sort of creative polymath in her day. It's striking to me, observing your career from afar, that you two are not dissimilar in the way that you have all of these different sorts of creative pursuits. Maybe, do you think that there was a sort of a kinship, maybe some sort of connection between two incredibly powerful artistic forces between the two of you that maybe caused the stars to align to allow the two of you to speak across the centuries in this way?
Wow, that's a really interesting connection. And I mean, I certainly wouldn't have said that when I began singing her music when I was 19 years old, but now that I'm 54, I guess I can see a bit of a connection. And not wanting to be defined as one thing or another, but researching and feeling a curiosity and a passion to try many different things. And it's funny because, the other person that I find like hugely inspiring, who is from our century, who is also like doing a million different things, is actually Barbara Streisand. Because Barbara Streisand is an actor, a singer, an advocate, a producer, a director, a writer, writing scripts, also did her own film editing. I mean, she also developed her skills on such a level. And in her biography, in her autobiography, she talked about how earlier in her career, she kind of hid it. She was almost apologetic about it because she didn't want to get, criticized for being too much. And I thought that was very interesting because you look at Hildegard and she's just too much in the most wonderful way. And I would rather we go in that direction than hiding our possibilities.
Again, so much possibility for things to engage with here. And there's not only Hildegard von Bingen and her sort of polymath output here to consider as well, with people like Barbara Strozzi also on this record, somebody who has a lot of different creative pursuits in her life. Maybe you could speak a little bit to the process of deciding that of the other composers that could have been included on this record, why Strozzi and why Francesca Caccini, to accentuate that sort of conversation that you and Hildegard von Bingen are having across centuries?
Well, I guess anyone looking at the album would think, oh, they chose 3 women composers. They were probably looking for female composers. Funnily enough, that was not the case at all. We were looking at old music and we came across these songs, Che t'ho fatio and Che si può fare, and we loved them so much. And it was because it was for that reason. It was being drawn to the material and thinking, how might this work with us? And we loved also, che si può fare means what can be done. And che t'ho fatio is what has been done to me,
Yeah.
So it's interesting because these questioning pieces about where to go, how to be, what to do. And Hildegard is the one who has all the answers, But these women in the Baroque era that were composing, super talented. I mean, Barbara Strozzi, I think the composers that knew about her said she is the most talented composer of our time. It wasn't she's the most talented female composer. She's simply the most talented composer. And, as a woman, I often am dealing with the label of not just being a conductor, but being a female conductor. And I really try to avoid that because I think none of my male colleagues get called male conductors, And what I'm doing is simply, making music regardless of the gender. issues. So it's interesting because I think we chose composers that are just simply fabulous and must have been very courageous and must have faced a certain, certain barriers. But at the same
Yeah.
time, they must have also had a lot of support. They must have.
Again, there's that sort of too much element that you were talking about before with Streisand that you could ascribe to all three of these composers. Audiences over the years have come to know your work, your performances in contemporary music spaces alongside performances of music by composers like Alban Berg or Ligeti, or most recently composers like John Zorn. What captures your creative interest about Baroque composers, medieval composers, and their musical language?
I think I'm often drawn to complexity of emotion, complexity of harmony. I think about, in harmony we have consonance, which is things that sound in tune to us, to the normal ear, and we have dissonance. Well, I'm often drawn to dissonance. I'm drawn to the crunchy sounds. And so if it was peanut butter, I would be going for the crunchy peanut butter. But on the other hand, I still need the bass skill, quality, technique to be there. So it's interesting for me because in the Baroque world, it is the dissonances that are interesting to me. In these pieces, it's emotional dissonances. And I just spent the entire month of April actually singing, and into May, singing rehearsing and singing the Pergolesi Stabat Mater at the cathedral in Geneva. Actually, it was more May. And it was wonderful to be singing that every single day, and the way that I approach those harmonies, it influences the way I come back to the contemporary music and vice versa, So I bring complexity to the most simple things and I bring simplicity to the most complex things. And I think that's a skill that I've developed over all these years, which is probably why I have a pretty big, audience for the kind of music that I do.
Right. So talk about these different approaches to try and level the playing field on these different musical languages that you are involved in. You mentioned before, and I wanted to get back into this idea of the specific language of Hildegard von Bingen, which is this lingua ignota, the unknown language. For those who may not know what this is, maybe you can walk us a bit through what this language is and what it is like to perform in this very sort of idiosyncratic way of communication.
Right. Yes, I mean there's a kind of dictionary of words that she invented. So it's hard. Actually, I know the words, but I don't even know the meanings because it seems like some people tried to translate what they thought she must have meant, but words like orskis, fugsal, Cynthia. She loved the Z and Cynthia, all these kind of percussive sounds in her language, and they mean things like mother and father and foot and flower, but they had their own words and so she created this language for her and her nuns to speak among themselves because they were in a cloister. They were enclosed. That was part of being a nun at that time, was to enclose yourself, to separate yourself from the world. So this was like a further enclosure for her and her nuns. It was one step further to make this cocoon even more tight around them so that no one from outside could come in and communicate with them if they so chose for this to happen. And what we did on the album was in several of the pieces, so a lot of the album is in Latin, or it's in Italian, or it's in Hildegard's secret language. And there's a piece where I'm kind of whispering the words of the secret language. I was actually covering my hands over the microphone and kind of whispering the words into the microphone. There's another piece that Bryce Dessner wrote called O Oris Quis Ecclesia, in which he's using Hildegard's words. So it just like brings everything to this level of mystery, which I think is really, in a way, that's kind of like the center of the album, is the mystery.
It's striking to hear you talk about the development of this language for Hildegard von Bingen, living in this enclosed environment in a cloister amongst her fellow nuns. And it strikes me that there's a bit of a similarity here too, in that a lot of this project was born, as you were talking about before, in a studio environment, almost a jam session between different musicians. And that's an experience that perhaps is a bit more unique for classical musicians. What was that experience like as you were first doing this jam session in Berlin, as you were talking about back in 2015, but then building this in a studio with these musicians in your own enclosed environment, building your own sort of musical language, singing in this lingua ignota, and creating this project?
Yeah, like normally when you record a classical album, you've got your music, you learn the music, you probably try to perform it a few times, and then you go into the recording studio and you lay it down. What we did was we came together over a period of I guess from the beginning in 2015 until the album was finally recorded was 2023, or maybe 2024 was the finals. We were in the studio at the Labèque's area, in the area of France where the Labèques live. It's in what's called the Basque country, so it's really south near Spain. And we would live together in the same house or close by to each other. We would spend days in the studio, trying different things out, trying out material, recording it, listening to it, then going back in. And then we would have our lunch together, and then maybe we would go to the sea at night and then come back to the studio later. I mean, there was a kind of a flow. And we did this over several years, several visits. We even re-recorded the entire album after we recorded it the first time, because we thought, oh, this could be a little bit better. Oh, let's try this. And so we added new things. At the same time, we actually performed the program in Los Angeles, Zurich, Budapest, in France, and in Hamburg. So we did it in 5 different cities. So we also had the feeling of, okay, what is this like as a live performance, and what is it like in the enclosed cocoon of the studio? And it's like a totally different feeling, because when you give a performance, you have to feel, you have to reach the audience. Whereas when you're in the studio, you're in this wonderful, almost like the womb of the studio. And so it was 2 very different experiences, both, I think, spiritual in their own way.
What do you hope audiences take away from engaging with this very unique, very well developed, very steeped in history musical language and musical experience?
Well, I think aspects of this album are ambient. So there's something like literally to relax with this music, maybe to be in a quiet space, a meditative kind of space, or stretching, or even dancing, I can imagine, kind of has a certain flow to it. There are other aspects of it that are more rhythmic and minimalist. So that brings you into a different zone. Like it's not something that you have to sit down and listen to and not do anything else, It's functional, I think, in a way, this album. I think it brings you into a different mindset. I think it's very relaxing, most of the pieces. There's a few that are like quite weird. There's one improvisation that I really went into a very different zone. Che può fare, I think it's part one, is quite it's quite out there. That's a really free improvisation. But yeah, I think it's a trip, you know. I think it's really a trip. And everyone that I know, especially the non-classical musicians, they say that it's like it brings them into a relaxed and very kind of meditative kind of headspace and emotional state when they're listening to it.
So that's the audience's experience for this record, but I would imagine, and we've touched on this a little bit, that it's a unique experience for you in your creative life as well, with the electronic elements in particular I'm thinking of, contributed by David Chalmin and Bryce Dessner, and you mentioned all of his various accolades in music and his collaborators, not the least of which being one Taylor Swift, maybe people have heard of. You've also recently, of course, shared recordings of pieces by composers that are still very innovative, but more composers that people will maybe be familiar with, composers like Messiaen, for example, and going back to John Zorn. You talked about performing the Pergolesi Stabat Mater recently. What is it about singing alongside electronic elements that is perhaps maybe creates a new sort of collaborative experience for you versus if you were to sing alongside analog elements, more traditional instruments and those things?
Well, I think with this album, it's the electronics and it's also the way that my voice is amplified. So like also in the performance and certainly in the recording, like I'm really using the mic and I'm really using the intimacy of the microphone. So it's not like when I sing a concert with orchestra where I'm not amplified, or an opera, you know, where I'm really making the sound to make sure that I fill the hall with my natural sound. Here I'm amplified. So we're using like the interaction, the intimacy of the voice very close to the mic. We're using reverb, a lot of reverb, and we're using it in a very, very technical and detailed way. It allows, I think, for a kind of intimate experience of my instrument, which a person would only hear if they were in a small room with me, as opposed to in a big concert hall. You know, so and for me also, like, to sing that way, it was refreshing. I loved it because I can bring out qualities of my sound that people will hear with a microphone that they would never hear in a large concert hall, because in a large concert hall, you have to sing all the way to the back seat of the hall. You have to make sure that your voice is going to reach that person that's sitting in the back seat. Whereas when you're singing for the microphone, it's as if I'm right next to you, you know. And I loved that experience. I was finding lots of colors in my sound that I hadn't really explored before.
What does a project like this enable you to do in the future as far as it relates to the way you approach music, how you think about your performance, and how, in the case of Baroque repertoire like this, or music that is so indelibly associated with history, how it resonates across the centuries and adds new dialogue to something that's been in existence for hundreds of years?
Well, I've always been interested in sacred music, in medieval and Renaissance music and Baroque music. This actually was part of my interest from the time that I was studying at university. And funnily enough, at the University of Toronto, the courses that I took outside of music were, for the most part, courses in religion and theology, because I was absolutely fascinated by humanity's connection to religion, to different religions, and to the ethics of the various religions. Like comparative religious ethics, I think, was one of the courses that I took. So in a way, I feel like I'm returning to something familiar funnily enough. And it gives me, maybe it's also because I'm now in my 50s, I'm in a leadership position, I'm working with younger people. I feel like the footprint that I'm making, I want to make sure that it resonates in a way that is always positive. And also as a leader in front of orchestras, as a conductor, you're looking after a lot of people. So for me, that has a kind of, I would use the word sacred quality. I think anyone in a leadership position has to accept the responsibility of that and take the mantle, of what that entails. Any public figure, really, as we know, it is the responsibility of public figures to act with kindness, generosity, dignity, in their leadership paths. And so I think, having this album is another step along my path. It is a departure, but on the other hand, it's so very much me.
There is a sacred quality to listening to this music for sure. I would also add the adjective celestial to this music, and I think that's something that perhaps Hildegard von Bingen would resonate with quite a lot in the way that she would approach her art and her music as well. What do you think? We're going to play Time Traveler here for a second and bring Hildegard von Bingen into 2025. How do you think that she would resonate with what you and your creative team alongside Electric Fields would have created? How do you think that she would respond?
Well, I hope that she would be looking for the authenticity of what we're doing. So I hope that she would resonate with our intentions, because I think for me, when I'm drawn to any kind of music, and I really do love all kinds of music, the way that I connect to those different kinds of music is whether there is this deep authenticity in the delivery of that. So any artist, any composer, are they authentic to themselves? Are they authentic in their relationship to the music? So is there a truth in it? That's extremely important to me. So I hope that Hildegard would have enjoyed. Maybe she might not have liked everything. Maybe she would have been surprised. Maybe she would have laughed and smiled. It would definitely be a person that I would love to go back in history and meet.
Barbara Hannigan, congratulations on this new record. And thank you so much for joining us here on Classic 107 to tell us more about Electric Fields.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today.